The morning sun glared off the polished hood of a luxury car stalled at the side of the road. Its owner, a towering billionaire CEO in an expensive suit, checked his watch impatiently. The crowd murmured as traffic slowed. From the corner, a frail voice cut through. Emily Parker, just 10 years old, her clothes faded, her shoes scuffed. With wide, determined eyes, she stepped forward and said, "I can fix it, sir." Laughter rippled through the onlookers. A little girl offering to repair a billionaire's engine? Impossible. But Emily didn't waver. This was no ordinary plea. It was her only chance. Her tiny frame held a hidden fire, one born not of privilege, but of desperation. And the billionaire's reaction would decide everything. The billionaire CEO, broad-shouldered with slicked-back hair and a diamond watch flashing, turned sharply toward Emily. His piercing eyes narrowed in disbelief, his lips curling into a smirk. Around him, the whispers grew louder. "A beggar girl? Fixing that car?" someone sneered. He adjusted his cufflinks, clearly irritated. "Little girl," he said, voice dripping with arrogance, "do you even know what this is worth? More than your life." The crowd chuckled cruelly, reinforcing his pride. But Emily didn't flinch. She shifted her weight nervously, clutching the hem of her faded shirt, her heart pounding. Still, her gaze didn't drop. In that scare, the CEO saw something unexpected. Not fear, but unshakable resolve. For the first time, he hesitated. Emily took a small step closer, voice trembling but steady. "Please, sir, I learned from my dad. Engines, wires, gears, I can help." Her thin hands bore the grime of someone far too young to have worked this hard. The truth lay behind her plea. Her mother, Katherine Parker, was bedridden at home, her cough worsening every night. Medicine was expensive, rent overdue. Emily's father, David Clark, once a mechanic, had passed too soon, leaving only his lessons and his tools. She carried both in her heart. Every word she spoke wasn't about pride, it was about survival. Her stomach growled with hunger, but her eyes pleaded with strength. The crowd shifted, some softening, others scoffing, but the billionaire's face remained stone. From the edges of the street, voices swirled like the hiss of wind. "Poor thing," a woman muttered, clutching her purse. "She's probably making it up." Another laughed. "Imagine a little beggar fixing a luxury engine." Their words cut sharper than knives, but Emily's lips pressed tight. She wouldn't cry here, not in front of them, not while her mother's face haunted her thoughts. A boy about her age tugged his father's sleeve, whispering, "Dad, maybe she can do it." But the man shook his head. Meanwhile, the CEO folded his arms, letting the ridicule fuel his pride. The bystanders' whispers built the stage, half a theater of pity, half of cruelty. And in the center stood Emily, fighting to be heard.
Finally, the billionaire CEO chuckled darkly, his polished shoes glinting under the sunlight. He crouched slightly, bringing his sharp eyes level with Emily's. "Listen, girl, my time is worth millions. Your hands are worth nothing." He straightened his jacket, brushing invisible dust from his sleeves. The crowd erupted in smug laughter, feeding his cruelty. Emily's cheeks burned, but her fists clenched. She wasn't just a beggar, she was her father's daughter. She had turned wrenches before she could write her own name. The CEO waved dismissively. "Step aside before you embarrass yourself further." The moment seemed sealed, but Emily's next words, soft but cutting, froze the noise. "If I fail, laugh at me. But if I succeed, will you listen?" The billionaire CEO tilted his head, amused by Emily's defiance. His gold cufflinks shimmered as he leaned back against the hood. "Fine," he said with a cruel smirk. "Entertain us. Fix it. And maybe I'll listen." The crowd buzzed with excitement, half expecting a humiliating failure, half curious. Emily's small hands trembled, but her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Engines are puzzles, Em. Don't be afraid of them." She inhaled sharply. then knelt by the luxury car, scanning wires and pipes with surprising focus. The CEO chuckled, certain she'd embarrass herself. But within seconds, Emily's fingers moved with precision, testing and tapping like a seasoned mechanic. The crowd's laughter softened into murmurs. Something about this little girl wasn't adding up.
Emily tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her face smudged with dirt, yet glowing with determination. Kneeling by the engine, she inspected the ignition system, her brow furrowed like an expert solving a riddle. Each touch carried echoes of late nights in her father's garage, his hands guiding hers. Bystanders leaned in closer, their smirks fading to curiosity. A woman whispered, "She actually knows what she's doing." The billionaire, arms crossed, masked his unease with arrogance. "Hurry up, girl," he scoffed, but his eyes betrayed the faintest flicker of doubt. Emily ignored him. Her lips moved silently, repeating her father's lessons. Though her body was fragile, her spirit radiated strength. For her mother's sake, for her dignity, failure wasn't an option. Emily paused, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. Her fingers rested on a loosened coil. For a brief second, she saw her father, David Clark, standing beside her in memory. His warm smile, the smell of engine oil clinging to his jacket, the way his deep voice always carried calm. Tighten connections, test flow, never panic. The memory grounded her. Emily adjusted the part carefully, hands steady now, as if her father's spirit guided her. The crowd, sensing something deeper, fell into silence. Even the CEO shifted uncomfortably, feeling the weight of her focus. In that stillness, the scene was no longer just a little girl fixing a car, it was a daughter honoring her father's legacy.
Emily twisted the final bolt, then wiped her small, greasy hands on her shirt. Rising slowly, she stepped back. Her chest heaved with nerves as she whispered, "Try it now." The billionaire rolled his eyes but slid into the driver's seat. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life with a smooth, powerful hum. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A boy clapped. A woman whispered, "She did it." The CEO froze, gripping the wheel tightly, his confidence shaken. Emily's lips curved in the faintest smile, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. She had proven herself. The impossible had been done, not by wealth or power, but by grit and love. The air shifted. Suddenly, everyone was watching the billionaire for his reaction. The billionaire CEO stepped out, his polished shoes hitting the pavement with unusual heaviness. For a moment, he said nothing, scanning the silent crowd. His usual arrogance wavered, his jaw tight. Emily's wide eyes looked up, waiting, hoping. The whispers swirled again. He has to reward her. She saved him. But instead, the CEO smirked, forcing his confidence back. "So you got lucky," he snapped, loud enough for all to hear. The crowd gasped, disappointment hanging thick in the air. Emily's shoulders slumped, but before despair took root, another twist emerged. David Clark's old friend stepped forward from the crowd, glaring at the CEO. His booming voice carried, "That wasn't luck, that's skill, and you know it." A new tension crackled. The game wasn't over.
The crowd, once entertained by a poor girl's struggle, now shifted in mood. Parents exchanged glances, admiration blooming. A teenage boy whispered, "She's braver than half of us." Emily stood small but unshaken, her messy hair framing her determined face. The CEO's dismissal had soured the air. Even his bodyguards looked uneasy, their posture stiff, avoiding eye contact with the onlookers. A woman in a business suit stepped forward, her voice firm. "Sir, you owe her more than insults. That child fixed what your money couldn't." Gasps followed, emboldening others. Murmurs grew to outrage. The billionaire adjusted his cufflinks, but his eyes flickered with unease. This wasn't just about a car anymore. The balance of power had begun to tilt, and the crowd wasn't on his side. Emily's lip quivered as she clutched the hem of her worn dress. "I didn't do it for him," she whispered softly, almost to herself. "I did it for Mom." The words, though quiet, carried in the hush. Her mother, Katherine Parker, frail and bundled in an oversized coat, stood weakly at the edge of the crowd. She raised a trembling hand, eyes wet with pride. That single image of a sick mother watching her little girl prove herself pierced through the onlookers' hearts. Even those who had doubted Emily now stared at her in awe. The CEO glanced at Katherine briefly, but quickly looked away, as though compassion was foreign to him. Emily's truth had become the hook, her love stronger than money or cruelty.
The billionaire CEO tightened his jaw, aware that the crowd's opinion was slipping out of his control. He puffed out his chest and sneered, "Don't mistake a trick for talent." But the reaction wasn't laughter, it was anger. A man shouted, "You should be ashamed." Another added, "She did what you couldn't." The billionaire's smirk faltered. For the first time, his empire of intimidation cracked in public. Emily, standing beside her mother, looked smaller than ever, but her bravery amplified her presence. The CEO's polished shoes seemed less steady now. He had underestimated the power of truth in a crowd. What had started as his stage was quickly becoming his trial. And somewhere in that silence, he realized his money couldn't buy respect. Just when the tension seemed unbearable, a deep, steady voice cut through the air. "I taught that girl's father everything he knew about engines." Heads turned. From the crowd stepped an older man with weathered hands and grease stains on his shirt. David Clark's old mentor, Mr. Howard. His presence carried weight, a mechanic whose reputation stretched across the city. Emily's eyes lit up with recognition. She had seen him once in her father's garage. "That wasn't luck," Howard continued. "That was legacy. Her father was the best mechanic I ever trained, and she's his daughter." A new murmur swept the crowd. Legacy, truth, honor. The billionaire's face blanched. For every word of denial he wanted to spit, Howard's testimony shut the door.
The billionaire CEO straightened his suit, fighting to regain control. He raised his voice above the whispers. "Enough of this circus. Do you people even know who I am?" But before he could finish, a man in the crowd spoke coldly. "Yes, and we've also seen who you really are today." The billionaire froze, his influence cracking further. Emily, emboldened, stepped forward. "You promised you'd listen," she said softly but firmly. The CEO clenched his fists, his silence louder than words. The crowd leaned in, sensing a breaking point. Then came the rehook. Howard pulled out his phone, waving it. "This entire thing," he said, "was recorded. Every word, every insult." Gasps erupted. The billionaire's eyes widened. His reputation wasn't just at risk, it was collapsing. Katherine Parker, frail but unyielding, slowly stepped forward. Her coat hung loosely on her shoulders, face pale from illness, yet her eyes burned with a mother's fire. She placed a hand gently on Emily's head. "My husband died fixing engines so others could keep moving forward," she said softly, "and now my daughter carries that same gift. She deserves respect, not ridicule." The crowd erupted in applause. Emily leaned into her mother, her tiny frame trembling, but Katherine's presence steadied her. Even the billionaire, for the first time, lowered his gaze. His arrogance clashed with something he couldn't buy: authentic courage. Katherine wasn't just frail anymore, she was the pillar holding her daughter's world together, and her quiet dignity cut deeper than any insult he could throw.
The billionaire CEO adjusted his tie, but the motion betrayed his nerves. His once booming voice now wavered. "You think a child fixing a car changes anything? You think this makes her special?" The words sounded hollow, weak even to himself. People crossed their arms, shaking their heads. A woman snapped, She's more special than all your millions combined." The CEO's jaw twitched. He glanced around, realizing he no longer had an audience. He had a jury. Every glare, every disapproving shake of the head pressed down on him like a weight. Emily stood silently by her mother's side, no longer begging, just waiting. The tables had turned. He wasn't in control anymore. He was cornered, and the world was watching him unravel. Then came a twist no one expected. A young mechanic from the crowd stepped forward, grease still on his hands from the morning shift. "If you're so sure she's nothing special," he challenged, "why don't you prove you can do better? Fix it yourself." The crowd gasped, murmurs of agreement rising. The CEO's face flushed crimson. His wealth had built skyscrapers, but here, in front of ordinary people, he was powerless. Emily's wide eyes sparkled with both fear and hope. She whispered, "Mom, he can't." Katherine squeezed her hand, knowing the truth. His empire was built on numbers, not sweat. The rehook landed sharp. For the first time, the billionaire was asked to prove himself, without money, without status, just with his bare hands.
The billionaire snarled and stepped toward the car. "Fine, watch and learn." He rolled up his sleeves, his polished watch glinting under the sun. Kneeling awkwardly, he fiddled with the hood latch, muttering curses. The crowd leaned in, eyes sharp with judgment. His movements were clumsy, hands fumbling against wires he didn't understand. Sweat beaded at his temple. After a few minutes, a spark hissed, making him yelp and jerk backward. Laughter rippled through the crowd. "Careful, boss," someone mocked. His face burned with humiliation, jaw clenched so hard his teeth ground audibly. Emily's small voice broke the laughter. "It's okay. Not everyone knows how." Her innocence stung sharper than ridicule. For the first time, the billionaire looked truly defeated, stripped of his pride. Silence stretched as the CEO stood, brushing dirt from his expensive suit. His reflection in the car window caught his eye. Sweaty, disheveled, mocked. For a fleeting second, he saw a younger version of himself, long before the money, when he too had once been powerless. His breathing slowed, arrogance faltering. Emily, holding her mother's hand, looked at him with pure honesty. No hatred, no gloating, just truth. That innocence pierced him more deeply than the laughter of strangers. The crowd murmured, sensing his conflict. This was no longer about a car, nor about wealth. It was about a man confronting the hollowness of his empire and the strength of a child who had shown him what true resilience meant. The turning point had arrived.
Emily, no taller than the car's hood, took a small step forward. Her shoes scuffed, her fingers stained with grease, she looked at the broken engine with calm focus. "May I try again?" she asked softly. The crowd instantly hushed. All eyes turned to her, the little girl who had become the center of this storm. The billionaire froze, still stinging from his humiliation. Katherine nodded weakly, her voice firm despite her illness. "Go on, sweetheart, show them." Emily climbed onto a crate, her tiny hands moving carefully where his had fumbled. Wires clicked into place, her brows furrowed in determination. The CEO's throat tightened. This wasn't luck, this was skill. Each twist of her small hands challenged everything he believed about worth. For a moment, silence ruled the street. Emily's hand twisted the last wire into place, and then, vroom! The engine sputtered, then roared to life. The crowd erupted in cheers and whistles. Some clapped, others shouted her name. Emily wiped sweat from her forehead, a shy smile breaking through her exhaustion. Katherine covered her mouth, tears brimming as pride lit her frail features. The billionaire's face, however, collapsed into disbelief. He had failed where a child had succeeded. Stripped of excuses, he could no longer hide behind wealth. Every cheer felt like a verdict against him. Emily's small frame, standing tall against the rumbling engine, became the day's undeniable proof. True strength wasn't in money, but in persistence and courage. The rehook struck hard.
The crowd closed in, forming a circle around the billionaire. "You call yourself powerful?" a man scoffed. "That little girl just did what you couldn't," a woman added. "Money doesn't fix everything, sir." Dozens of voices echoed, growing louder, harsher, stripping away his dignity with every word. The billionaire raised a trembling hand, trying to silence them, but the tide had turned. Their judgment was merciless. Emily stood beside her mother, clutching Katherine's hand, still smiling timidly despite the noise. She didn't need to speak. Her actions had spoken louder than any words. The CEO's breath grew shallow. He was no longer the untouchable figure in the spotlight. He was the accused, cornered, with no way out except through humility. Katherine, weak but unshaken, took a step toward him. Her voice, though soft, carried over the noise. "You see her as small, but she is greater than you'll ever be if you stay blind to what truly matters. My daughter fixed your engine, but what she really repaired was the truth. Money is useless without heart." The crowd erupted again, applauding her words. The billionaire staggered, his eyes darted from the roaring engine to the mother and daughter standing firm together. For the first time, he saw them not as beggars, but as warriors. His empire, his arrogance, his control, all felt paper-thin against their quiet resilience. Katherine's words had cut through the last of his pride, leaving only silence in his chest.
The billionaire's knees nearly buckled. He gripped the car door, breathing heavy, his polished shoes now coated in dust. Every mocking laugh, every disappointed glare pressed down like a weight. He looked at Emily, her eyes wide but unafraid, and then at Katherine, fragile yet immovable. In their faces, he saw everything he had lost: innocence, love, dignity. His lips trembled, words stuck in his throat. For years he had believed money was power, but here, stripped of it, he felt powerless. The silence stretched long enough for everyone to feel it. Then, finally, his shoulders slumped, his head bowed. For the first time, the billionaire wasn't commanding attention, he was surrendering to it. The crowd waited, breathless, sensing the confession was near. The billionaire finally spoke, his voice hoarse, stripped of its commanding edge. "I was wrong." The crowd fell silent instantly. "I mocked her. I mocked both of you. I thought wealth gave me worth, but today a little girl showed me what real strength looks like." His gaze lingered on Emily, who clutched her mother's hand tighter. "I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need to say it. I'm sorry." A hush swept over the crowd. For the first time, people weren't watching the mighty CEO flaunt power. They were watching a man admit weakness. His words, fragile but real, struck deeper than his fortune ever could. Emily's small nod in response became the first step towards something greater, his chance at redemption.
The billionaire took a deep breath, his polished image gone. "Emily," he said softly, "you've taught me more today than I've learned in years. If you'll let me, I want to repay what I owe, not with pity, but with opportunity." He turned to Katherine, his voice steadier. "I'll cover your medical bills. And Emily, if you'll accept, I want to sponsor your education to make sure your brilliance never goes unnoticed again." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some smiled, others whispered, but all felt the shift. This wasn't arrogance anymore, it was respect. Emily's eyes widened, tears shimmering. She didn't know how to answer, but Katherine placed a trembling hand over her daughter's shoulder, whispering, "Sometimes, even broken people can learn." The crowd broke into applause, not for the billionaire, but for the little girl who had forced change into the heart of a man untouchable by power. "That's the real boss right there," someone shouted, pointing at Emily. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, it was joyful. People approached, offering high fives, kind words, and even small gifts. Emily,
overwhelmed, leaned against her mother. The billionaire stood back, letting the moment belong to her. For once, he wasn't at the center. He was the witness. And in that moment, he realized true leadership wasn't about being above others, but lifting them higher. It was the kind of lesson money could never buy. And Emily, without even knowing it, had just rewritten his world.
Days later, Katherine lay in a proper hospital bed, her treatments underway, paid in full. Emily sat beside her, sketching engine designs on scrap paper, dreams no longer chained by poverty. The billionaire visited quietly, no cameras, no suits, just a man trying to make good on his promise. He brought books, tools, and even a small laptop for Emily to learn. "Build," he told her softly. "The world needs more of what you carry inside." Katherine watched, her eyes wet, whispering prayers of gratitude. For the first time, she saw a future where her daughter's gifts would bloom freely. And the billionaire, humbled, found himself feeling richer than he ever had, not by profit, but by purpose. The camera faded back to Emily, her small fingers tinkering with bolts on the laptop stand she had modified. Katherine's voice narrated softly, "Never underestimate the strength of the smallest hands. Where arrogance fails, courage builds. Where money blinds, truth reveals." Emily looked up, her shy smile radiant, and for a fleeting second, the billionaire smiled too, not as a man of wealth, but as a man reborn. Outside the hospital window, the morning sun painted the world gold. The story ended not with riches, but with a whisper of strength carried by a child who believed she could. And she did, because sometimes the smallest voices change the loudest hearts.